I feel as if the modern job market, and especially for people that are graduating college in their 20s, early 30s, but also generally the job market is cooked. And it's not like a post 2008 recession cooked where there was a big event that, everything dropped down and it was rebuilding. So you saw the rebound in the job market. This is almost like structural change in the job market, which is seemingly going to continue, at least for a while, to only make the job market more and more difficult. And if things continue this way, it doesn't seem like it's going to have a rebound and improve. And it really seems to be, you know, having really, significant cultural consequences. If you go back into the day, right, in the, post World War II, quite often you'd have situations where it would be you went to work for a company your entire life. You go to work to AT&T. They would give you fairly good salary. You're not going to climb the ranks quickly and be a super big baller executive, but you had that feeling that this was your company that you were going to be with. And you'd have good employment plan, good retirement, good everything like that. And it allowed you to reasonably build a family around it. I think that when the encouragement of family development declines and no longer exists, and you see kind of families no longer forming, that's usually when a society really starts to crumble. I mean, you can look through the history books. It really is a consistent theme that when that falls apart, you're in for a lot of trouble. And also with it becoming more and more difficult to get a job and land a career, because it is something where you might be able to land part-time work or a job without any upward mobility, but that's very different from landing a job where you feel some security. I think there's a big thing in, do you want to like marry someone? Do you want to have kids when you are feeling like you're completely unstable in your financial trajectory? You might be able to support yourself, but to have a child, have multiple children, you need significantly more income than to support yourself. And if you don't feel comfortable with that there being a path for you, then you're not going to have a kid. I mean, you might have a kid anyways and figure it out, but at least if you look at the population averages, the age of getting married keeps on going up, and there are other reasons for that. The number of kids on average, that you're having is going down. And the reason why this time it feels different is really, I mean, this is no surprise to anyone, but the large language models, these AI tools, what used to just be a really interesting trick with linear algebra, where it was able to solve chess, not fully, but get really, really good at chess, better than any human, was able to get better at Go than any other human, was able to kind of give you funny responses in 2021 with the first launch of ChatGPT. You knew it was cool, but there was enough issues with it. There was enough problems that people really were like, oh, this isn't going to take the jobs, right? The problem is that so many entry level jobs into these, careers you might have, they really, one of the prerequisites, it's almost that you need to do this grunt work. Think about like a law firm. Once you become up to the point of partner, it's less so about the fact that you are a great lawyer. I mean, it's helpful to be a great lawyer, but at that point, it's more so about managing relationships. You're not going to have an AI tool that's going to manage relationships, and a lot of those upper level roles are probably not going to be replaced by these AI tools anytime soon, simply because there's such human to human involvement, right? But how do you get to those upper level positions? Well, you need to do these lower level positions, which companies reasonably, from the sake of being a company, they're looking at all these different components that they're just simply saying, I don't need a person to do this. And not only do I not need a person to do this, if I use these AI tools, then it will be done basically equally as well, and it will be done for 0.00001% of the price. I think some companies are overcorrecting too soon. You saw this with, companies like Facebook and other ones like that, firing a bunch of their engineers and starting to hire them back, right? It was kind of too quick of an overcorrection. However, these tools get better every single day, right? And it is something where these tools continue to get better. And it's from conversations I have with peers, from just seeing sentiment online, seeing sentiment in general. there are just no job openings, right? And it's not only that there aren't that many job openings, the job openings that are there are more in the secondary bucket. It's something where it is, hey, this is, you can do this part time, or I need you to do this project, where you don't have, it's almost like little scraps, and you can't collect all the scraps together and have a role. Because as a business, you're really disincentivized to hire someone full time. I know I run a business and we have a handful of full time employees. It is legally a lot more complicated. You pay 15% to 20% more, if not 30% more, on top of their salary through payroll taxes and other forms of taxes. A part time worker doesn't have any of that. And if you're just looking at these businesses, right, you can't expect them to all of a sudden say, hey, we're just going to offer these jobs for the sake of like offering jobs. Each business is struggling to survive, right? It's PvP out there. It's 1v1. But collectively, that's very detrimental because the incentive structure right now is misaligned. And I know so many people, it used to be if you were smart and went to a good school and had good internships, that you were going to get a job out of college and that there was a chance that maybe you weren't going to get the job that you wanted more than anything, right? But you were going to get a solid job. The number of people I know that are incredibly hardworking and smart, and it's not only just the people that are, normal average people, it's also the overachievers who have almost built their entire life around optimizing for a career path. I mean, you probably know those kids in school where it's like all the SAT trainings to get into a good college, all the co-curriculars, not for the love of the co-curriculars, but to pad a resume to then get into college. And then in college, it's the co-curriculars and the clubs, not for the love of the co-curriculars or for the love of the clubs, but because it looks good on a resume to get an internship. And I can understand this path. I really do. Sometimes you come from families that apply a ton of pressure. Sometimes you're internally very motivated to make something of yourself. Sometimes you have to. You're going to be the one in your family that is going to bring it home. And, I can at least speak for the United States, right? But it's, it used to be this kind of like beauty of like in America, if you worked really hard, right? If you didn't work that hard, you weren't going to necessarily get all the things you wanted. However, if you worked hard, it might have taken a little bit longer, or it might not be exactly what you were thinking, but you were going to be benefited, right? And there have been other revolutions before, right? The Industrial Revolution, I think one of the bigger ones on this list, where a lot of farming jobs, specifically a lot of, there's the agricultural revolution, the Industrial Revolution, a lot of factory jobs were replaced very quickly, right? And there was massive unemployment. However, new jobs took their place, right? It's the unemployment rate, I still believe, I think those numbers are a little weird, but still in the lower category in the history of like the last couple hundred years. However, this is so wide, that was siloed towards one specific industry. It was a big industry and it was very impactful. And it did do a lot of societal damage. Think about, when did the Industrial Revolution, and then what was the political climate in that time? Well, we had two world wars, right? And a lot of those world wars were, most world wars, like they're started because of economic, political, and cultural instability, right? These are not separate things, right? And it's something now with these AI tools that are, really spreading across not only just like you're like, the computer science degree people, they worked hard, but now they're getting replaced. Shouldn't put all your eggs in one basket. Yeah, I get it, but it's everyone. It's people in marketing. It's people in HR. It's people in hiring, which is one of the things you'd think that's like one of the roles you have to have a person. I'm seeing all these, it's really just, applications are reviewed by these AI tools. They're also submitted by these AI tools. You're seeing these AI virtual like interviews, which are just absurd to me. That I just can't get around. But it's all of these jobs, and especially the jobs where it's you will have a career trajectory. If you enter this role, maybe it's not like the 50s or the 60s where you'd work at one company your entire life, but you would be able to go from one role to another, from company to company, but they would be continuing to increase because of your expertise in the previous role. You'd be continuing up the ladder, even if it wasn't upward within one company, even if it was almost vertical or horizontal kind of like jumping back and forth, but you're still making vertical progress. Here it's as if all the roles where you could make vertical progress, right, and really build something where you can reasonably start a family around, it's as if they're evaporating. And they're evaporating at a rate that is extremely, like it's very questionable. And we really come to a point where we have to, as kind of like a society, really sit down and think um, about, are there going to be roles in the future, right, that the average person can do? And I pose that seriously. It's something where forever, right, there was always going to be some, if maybe one role, such as some kind of industrial labor was being replaced, maybe the whole thing with Amazon automated like trucks, and like trucking is a massive part, especially of middle America, and supports a lot of communities there. There's kind of these individual roles where they were being eyed up, being replaced, but now we're seeing this widespread, you know, we're seeing this widespread almost culling of all these jobs simultaneously. And I think the scale and the magnitude of this is what makes it concerning. When it was isolated to individual jobs or titles, it would be damaging, and especially damaging to some communities over other communities. I mean, you can see the 2016 election, a lot of that was, a lot of that campaigning was done over the almost erosion of the Rust Belt, right? And it was a little bit more, and that message resonated more in the Rust Belt than it did in California or it did in Florida, right? Or that specific part of the messaging. But this is widespread. And especially if you're looking at home ownership, right? That's one of the staples of building a family. When I think about America, I think about, you have your wife and your kids or husband, whatever, right? You have a family and you have a house and you finally buy a house. And that is where you raise your kids. And that is that you have a piece of ownership in this community that we have together. My biggest fear is if people don't have a piece of the community, right? What's stopping them? Why would they hold it up? It really, you can have laws, you can have, police enforcement, you can have all of these things, but that doesn't last very long if everyone's unhappy. To have a kind of a community, to have a kind of society in a sense, right? It's every single individual has to play into it. Every single individual to some level believes in it and is maybe they have some distrust with government or they dislike certain parts, but they're fighting to change it. And one of the biggest things, the differences, is fighting to change it versus looking to like completely flip the table. Because if you still believe fundamentally the system you have a path in, there might be certain laws or regulations or cultural norms that you want changed, but it's still within that general system that everyone's in together. But if you can't have kids and you can't get married and you can't buy a house and you are running back and forth between these part-time jobs that you don't see any future in and your whole life is sucked away from you, at what point what do you have to lose? And whenever you enter a negotiation, the key to winning a negotiation, if you can do this, is to truly be able to walk away. If you have something where you could walk away and the deal will be great, but you don't need it, then that's how you win. And if you apply that same kind of logic and reasoning to, individuals in society, right? If the most dangerous it is if someone has nothing to lose, they could walk away from it and be no problem. They have no reason to play the games of, well, we'll have this law passed. Oh, well, do this, but you'll get this. If you don't feel as if you have any piece in this, why would you play by the rules? And it does make me nervous, right? Because if you look through thousands of years of history, this is not the first time that there's been economic or cultural instability, right? This is just one of many. And it is always very questionable. It's very dark when you look at what precedes these periods of economic instability, especially when things don't look as if they're going to get better. At least in 2008, as destructive as that was to individuals and this kind of feeling that no one was held accountable, there was at least a path forward. It wasn't as if all of your jobs you could reasonably take are going to be replaced. Because we might enter a world where there's only for the top 10% of people, there's jobs, right? You're almost instructing what these AIs are supposed to do. Um, I think that there's a lot of physical labor jobs that will continue to be around for a while, but there's a lot of really impressive, but also concerning rapid advancements in three-dimensional, like, robotics, right? Using this kind of, machine learning. And as a math major, there is something quite, fascinating with very simple linear algebra completely changing the world. If you want to look into large language models, you don't even really need that much linear algebra. Maybe even a little bit like your high school linear algebra should be enough to get the baseline understanding of what's going on. But it's also terrifying in some way. And I wonder if someone like, you had Andrew Yang with like UBI, I think he came in way too early with that. But if there really is a position where 90% cannot like have a job, where it's like there's just no company, maybe the government, right? There'd be government mandated jobs like in the Great Depression. The government would have jobs and have people do these things, right? Just to stimulate the economy a bit. If we get to a point where there's only the top 5%, right? Where it's a lot of times like, okay, well, start your own company. That's a lot harder than you think. Your failure rate is massive. Telling someone to start their own business or to do their own thing is not indicative of stability, and you need that for family formation, right? Some people take the risk anyways, but that's not meant for 99% of people. And the 1% of people it's meant for, 99% of them will fail if you look at the numbers. That is not a recommendation that's going to solve this. I, if you can't tell, I'm a little nervous.